The wind in Wyoming in 1870 did not just blow. It came down from the mountains like a blade, carrying the taste of iron and ice. And it tried to peel the world back to the bone on this night as the sun bled out behind the western peaks. The wind was bringing a blizzard. It was a shroud, a heavy, suffocating white that swallowed the plains whole. Miles from any track that could be called a road, sitting in a shallow dip of the land, was a cabin. It was small, built of thick but rough-hewn logs, with a stone chimney that breathed a thin ribbon of gray smoke. Inside, Wes Coltrane moved with the slow, deliberate rhythm of a man who lives by the sun and the cold, and nothing else. Wes was not an old man, but he was worn. Life had carved him down. A scar, thin and white, cut from his left temple to the edge of his jaw, pulling the skin tight so that his eye always seemed to be watching. Even when he was tired, his hands were leather, cracked and stained, and they knew the weight of an axe, the grip of a rope, and the cold steel of a revolver. His life was built on routine. Routine was the fence he built against the past. He checked the chinking in the log walls, stuffing a few rags tighter where the wind moaned through. He ran a hand over the iron hinges of the heavy door. Secure. He lifted the trapdoor to the root cellar, checking his meager supplies. Potatoes, onions, half a sack of flour, coffee, and jerky. It would do. He pulled on his heavy coat, the wool stiff as board, and wrapped a scarf over the lower half of his face. He lit the lantern, its yellow light weak against the pressing dark, and stepped outside. The wind hit him like a fist. It stole his breath and drove needles of ice into his skin. He leaned into it, shoulders hunched, and made his way to the lean-to that served as a barn. Inside, the air was warmer, thick with the smell of hay and animal musk. His horse, a sturdy buckskin, huffed a greeting. Wes ran a hand down its flank, checking its warmth. He threw it an extra measure of hay. He did the same for the milk cow, her bell clinking softly in the dark. "You eat slow, old girl," he murmured. His voice was rough, like stones dragging. "It has got to last." He was a man who spoke more to his animals than he ever had to people. Animals were honest. They did not lie. They did not betray. And they did not ask questions. He finished his chores, his movements economical. Every piece of wood stacked, every tool hung, every rope coiled. This was his world. It was quiet. It was disciplined. It was empty. And that was how he wanted it. He returned to the cabin, shaking the ice from his hat. He bolted the heavy door, dropping the thick wooden bar into its brackets. The sound was final, a solid, satisfying chunk. He was safe. The world was shut out. He added a log to the fire, the sparks dancing up the chimney. He sat at his small table, pulling a whetstone from a box. He began to sharpen his hunting knife, the slide of steel on stone the only sound besides the storm's scream. Then he heard it. It was not the wind. The wind whined and battered. This was a sound, a weak, frantic thump, thump, thump. Wes froze. His hand stopped moving on the stone. He waited. The wind howled. A rising shriek. It must have been the wind. A branch, maybe, torn loose and thrown against the wall. No one was out here. No one could be out here. This was Coltrane's land. Miles of nothing. And this storm was not a storm for traveling. It was a storm for dying. Thump, thump, thump. This time it was weaker, desperate. It was at the door. Wes put the knife down. He rose slowly, his body tense. Trouble came in many forms, but it almost never knocked politely. He moved to the side of the door, his hand going not to the bar, but to the Winchester rifle leaning against the wall. He picked it up, the wood smooth and familiar in his grip. "Who is it?" he called out. His voice was lost in the wind. He heard a sliding sound, like a body collapsing. He cursed, low and bitter. This was not his concern. Anything out there was already dead. But the sound had been human. He moved to the door, his rifle held ready. He braced himself, then lifted the bar. He pulled the door open just a crack. The wind tore it from his hand, slamming it wide open against the interior wall. The storm exploded into the cabin, a vortex of snow and ice, extinguishing the candles and sending the fire erupting in a shower of embers. A figure, a drift of white, fell forward onto the cabin floor. Wes slammed the door shut against the blizzard, throwing the bar back into place. He stood in the sudden, roaring silence, the firelight flickering back to life, his rifle still pointed at the shape on his floor. It was a woman. She was half frozen, her body shaking in violent, uncontrollable spasms. She was soaked, her hair plastered to her skull with ice, and she was wearing a wedding dress. It was not a fancy dress, just simple white cotton and lace, but it was unmistakably a wedding dress. It was torn at the hem, plastered with mud and slush. The lace at the cuffs ripped. She was a heap of ruined white on his dirty floor. She pushed herself up on one elbow, her breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. She looked at him, her eyes wide with a terror so profound it eclipsed the cold. "Please," she whispered. The word was broken, a puff of frost. "Please, God, he is coming." Wes looked at her. He saw the ice in her hair, the blue tint of her lips. He saw the fine fabric of the dress, now ruined. This was trouble. This was the outside world, the world he had left, trying to break into his sanctuary. "There is no he out there," Wes said, his voice flat. "There is nothing out there but the storm. You are chasing ghosts." "No." She tried to crawl, a pitiful movement, like a bird with a broken wing. "He will find me. I cannot go back." She collapsed again, sobs mixing with the shiver. "Please, just the night, just until the storm passes. I will not be a burden. I will leave. I swear it." Wes stared at her. His first instinct, the one that had kept him alive, was to say no, to pick her up and put her back outside. She was not his problem. He had enough ghosts of his own. But she was dying, right there on his floor. And even a man like Wes Coltrane, a man who had walled himself off from the world, could not watch that. He let out a long breath, his jaw tight. He set the rifle back against the wall. "Get up," he said. She flinched at his tone, but she tried. Her limbs would not obey. With a grunt of resignation, Wes bent down. He slid one arm under her back and the other under her knees. He lifted her. She weighed almost nothing. She was a bundle of cold lace and shaking bones. She gave a small, terrified cry as he lifted her, as if expecting a blow. He carried her to the hearth. He did not set her on his cot. That was his. He laid her on the rough plank floor, but on the bearskin rug that lay before the fire. The heat rolled over her, and she shuddered, a deep, agonizing quake. "You will die in those clothes," he said, not unkindly, but as a fact. He went to his trunk at the foot of his cot. He pulled out a pair of his own wool trousers and a thick flannel shirt. They were clean. They would swallow her whole. He tossed them onto the rug beside her. "Change," he commanded. He turned his back to her, a deliberate gesture. He busied himself at the fire, adding another log, moving the coffee pot closer to the heat. He heard fumbling sounds behind him, the rustle of wet fabric, a sharp intake of breath as the cold air hit her skin. He did not turn. He just stared into the flames. "I am decent," she finally whispered. He turned. She was huddled in his clothes, the sleeves rolled up a dozen times, the trousers held at her waist with a fist. Her wet dress lay in a heap by the door. She looked small, a child lost in a man's world. Her dark hair was beginning to dry, curling around a face that was pale as milk. And now, in the firelight, he saw what the cold and the dark had hidden. There were marks on her, around her delicate wrists. Where the lace of the dress had been, were dark, angry circles. They were the color of a fresh plum, They were the size and shape of a man's fingers. He saw the shadow of another bruise high on her cheekbone, near her temple, hidden mostly by her hair. Wes looked away, his jaw clenching. He had seen marks like that before. He had seen them on women in mining camps and saloon halls. He had seen them on his own mother, long ago. It was the mark of a heavy hand, a cruel hand. He did not ask. He did not want to know. He ladled some hot stew from the pot hanging over the fire. It was thin, mostly broth and a few pieces of rabbit, but it was hot. He handed her the bowl and a spoon. Her hands shook so badly she could barely hold it. He watched as she lifted the spoon, spilling most of it. She did not seem to notice. She just crammed the hot metal into her mouth, desperate for the warmth. The silence in the cabin grew, broken only by the click of the spoon against the bowl and the howl of the wind. It was a heavy silence, thick with everything that was not being said. But it was not a cold silence. The fire was between them. She finished the stew, scraping the bowl clean. She set it down gently on the hearth. Wes sat in his chair across the room, picking up his knife and a piece of pine. He began to whittle, the blade moving with practiced, steady strokes. Shavings fell onto the floor. He was aware of her watching him. He could feel her gaze. It was not like the gaze of other women he had known. It was not judging. It was not curious. It was the look of an animal that has been cornered, watching the one other living thing in the room, trying to decide if it was a threat. He kept his eyes on the wood. He worked the pine, shaving off the layers, finding the shape hidden inside. The fire popped, a log cracking and sending a hot ember onto the stones. She jumped, a violent, total body flinch. A small, choked sound escaped her throat. Her hands flew up to cover her face. Wes stopped whittling. She lowered her hands slowly, her face burning with shame. "I am sorry," she whispered. Wes just shook his head. He returned to his work. The hours passed. The storm did not lessen. It seemed to dig in, settling over the cabin like a hungry wolf. Finally, the woman's breathing evened out. Her head, heavy with exhaustion, nodded. She fought it, her eyes snapping open, wide and afraid, before they would drift shut again. Wes rose. He went to his cot and pulled off the top blanket, a thick wool trade blanket. He walked over to her. She tensed, her eyes flying open, watching him as he approached. He did not meet her gaze. He simply laid the blanket on the floor by the hearth, a few feet from her. He placed a second, smaller blanket, rolled as a pillow, at the head of it. "You sleep there," he said. She looked at the blanket, then at his cot. "Where will you—" "The barn," he said. "But the storm, you cannot, it is too cold." "The horse and the cow keep it warm enough. I have slept in worse." He picked up his rifle, a motion so natural it was part of him. He went to the door. He looked back at her. She was just a small, huddled shape in the firelight. "Bolt this after me," he said. "Do not open it, for any reason. Understand?" She nodded, her eyes huge. He unbarred the door, stepped out into the blinding white fury, and pulled it shut behind him. He heard the solid thunk of the bar falling back into place. He fought his way to the barn, the 20 yards feeling like a mile. He was half frozen himself by the time he stumbled inside, slamming the barn door against the wind. He climbed the ladder to the small loft, burrowing deep into the hay. It was cold, but it was a clean cold. It was a simple cold. It was not the complicated, dangerous trouble he had just locked inside his house. He lay there, rifle beside him, listening to the storm. He did not sleep. Inside the cabin, Miriam Hayes stared at the door. She was alone, truly alone. The heat from the fire was a pain, a needle-sharp thawing of her skin. But the warmth could not reach the cold place deep inside her. She had been running for 2 days. She had run the night before her wedding. She had run from Landon Cale. Her mind slipped, pulling her back. away from the warm fire and the strange, scarred man, and back to the parlor of her father's house. Her father, a man broken by bad investments and worse whiskey, had not looked at her. He had stared at the polished wood of his desk. Mr. Cale is a man of considerable influence. Miriam, he had said, his voice hollow. He owns the bank. He owns half the valley. He has forgiven our debts. Forgiven? Miriam had asked, her hands cold. He finds you pleasing. He is in need of a wife. It is a good match. Father, he is twice my age. He is a hard man. The things people whisper. Whispers! Her father had slammed his hand on the desk, the first spark of life in his eyes. You will be mistress of the largest ranch in this territory. You will want for nothing. You will do as I say. Landon Cale had been a different kind of monster. He did not raise his voice. He did not have to. He was a big man, but soft, with pale hands and eyes that were flat and gray as river stones. He moved with a heavy, deliberate confidence, as if the world was built only to bear his weight. He had smiled at her, a smile that did not touch his eyes. He had brought her gifts, a silk ribbon, a silver locket. He would place them in her hand, his thumb brushing her palm, a touch that made her skin crawl. The night before the wedding, he had come to the house for dinner. Her father drank too much, celebrating his good fortune. After her father had passed out in his chair, Landon had cornered her in the hallway. He had backed her against the wall, his body blocking the light. He smelled of cigars and expensive brandy. You are a very quiet thing, are you not, Miriam? He had murmured. He reached out and touched her hair. She had flinched. Please, Mr. Cale, it is late. It is Landon, and it will be. Soon. He had gripped her chin, forcing her to look at him. His smile was gone. You belong to me now. Your father has seen to it. You will learn to be pleasing. You will learn not to flinch. He had leaned in. She had turned her head, and his kiss had landed wet and hard on her cheek. Rage, cold and sudden, had flashed in his eyes. His hand, the one that had held the brandy glass, shot out and grabbed her wrist. His fingers tightened, a vice of bone and flesh. Do not, he hissed, his voice still quiet, ever turn away from me. He had squeezed. She had cried out, a small, strangled sound. The bones in her wrist had ground together. He had watched her face, his own expression one of cold assessment. Then he had grabbed her other wrist, holding them both. You will be my wife tomorrow, he said, and you will learn your place. He had shoved her, hard, against the wall. Her head had cracked against the wood trim. Then he had straightened his waistcoat, smoothed his hair, and left. Miriam had stood there, shaking, spots dancing in her vision. She had looked at the wedding dress, laid out on her bed, a white shroud. She had waited until the house was dark. She had put on the dress. It was the warmest thing she owned besides her thin coat. She had stolen the meager contents of the house safety box, taken a horse from the stable, and ridden into the teeth of the approaching storm. She had ridden until the horse gave out. Then she had walked until she could not feel her feet. She had followed the thin thread of smoke. She had found the cabin. Now, lying by the fire, she drifted into a black, exhausted sleep. But sleep was no sanctuary. He was there. Landon was there. His face, pale and smiling, loomed over her. His hands were on her, heavy, holding her down. The smell of brandy filled her lungs, choking her. She was back in the hallway. She was in the church. She was in a dark room, and she could not breathe. She could not breathe. A scream tore itself from her lungs. It was not a sound, but a piece of her soul, ripped out. She woke up, sitting bolt upright on the bearskin rug. The cabin was dark. The fire was dying. Just a pile of red embers. She was shaking, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. The cabin door burst open. The wind and snow roared in. Wes Coltrane stood silhouetted against the gray-white chaos, the rifle in one hand. He slammed the door and barred it, plunging the room back into near darkness. Miriam scrambled backward, crab-walking away from him until she hit the cold stones of the hearth. "No, no, please, do not!" Wes did not move. He stood by the door, letting his eyes adjust. He could see her, a pale shape huddled by the dying fire. He could hear her ragged, terrified breathing. He did not raise the rifle. He did not step toward her. He walked to the small table, struck a match, and lit the oil lamp. A soft, yellow glow pushed back the worst of the shadows. He held the lamp up. His face was grim, his eyes shadowed, the scar on his face a deep groove. He looked at her, truly looked. She was not a threat. She was a child, broken by terror. "It was a dream," he said. His voice was low, trying to cut through her panic. "He was here," she sobbed, pulling her knees to her chest. "He found me. I could not—" "No one is here," Wes said. He walked past her, deliberately giving her a wide berth. He knelt at the hearth. He added 2 small logs to the embers, blowing on them gently until a small flame licked at the wood. He did not ask what she had dreamed. He did not ask who he was. He did not ask about the bruises. He simply rebuilt the fire. He set the lamp on the table, where its light filled the center of the room but left her in the softer shadows by the fire. He sat in his chair. It creaked under his weight. He didn't pick up his whittling. He just sat, a guardian. Miriam's sobs slowly subsided into hitched, painful breaths. The silence returned, filled by the fire's crackle and the storm's endless voice. She watched him, this strange, scarred man who had offered her shelter and then left her alone. He had come back not with anger, but with a lamp. He was just sitting there. He was not looking at her. He was staring at the floor, his hands resting on his knees. He was just present. The minutes stretched, the new logs caught, and the firelight grew stronger, warmer. She was so tired, but she was so afraid of sleep, afraid of the man in the chair, afraid of the man who was hunting her. Her voice, when it came, was so small he almost did not hear it over the wind. It was the sound of a thing that expects to be broken. "Can I stay the night?" Wes Coulter does not move. He does not look at her. He just stares at the fire, as if seeing other nights, other storms, other fears. He thought of the long, empty years. He thought of the silence of this cabin and the loudness of the ghosts that filled it. He thought of the world outside, a world of men like Landon Cale, a world that chewed up and spat out the soft and the weak. He had locked that world out, and now it had fallen, bleeding, onto his floor. He spoke to the fire, his voice rough, but clear and certain in the small, warm room. "You can stay forever." That one night bled into the next. The world outside the cabin did not just pause, it ceased to exist. The wind was a living thing, a white demon that screamed and clawed at the log walls, trying to find a way in. Snow piled up, burying the single window until Wes had to dig it out just to let in a sliver of gray, suffocating light. The cabin, once Wes's solitary fort, became a ship lost at sea. It was small, just one room, and the silence inside grew as large as the storm outside. They were trapped. Food became the marker of time. Wes was a man who planned, but he planned for one. Now, there were 2. He looked at his supplies with a hard eye. "We ration," he said on the second morning. It was not a discussion. The meals became grim theater. A handful of oats boiled with water, half a potato each, roasted in the coals. Coffee, his one comfort, was measured out like gold dust. 1 cup in the morning, boiled thin, the rest of the day. They drank hot water. The world shrank to the flicker of the fire, the howl of the wind, and the sound of another person's breathing. Wes's routine held, but it was changed. His trips to the barn became desperate, dangerous voyages. He tied a rope from the cabin door to the barn door, a lifeline against the whiteout. To lose his way in those 30 yards was to die. The first time he went, Miriam watched from the door, her face pale. He vanished into the solid wall of white, and for a terrifying 10 minutes, she was alone again. When he returned, covered in ice, his beard a frozen mass, she let out a breath she had not known she was holding. The second time, as he pulled on his coat, she stood up. She was wearing his trousers, belted tight with a bit of rope, and the flannel shirt that hung on her like a sack. "I am coming," she said. "No." "I will not be baggage," she said, her voice quiet but fierce. "I will not sit by the fire and be useless while you work. I will earn my keep." He looked at her. He saw the bruises on her face, the exhaustion in her eyes, but he also saw the set of her jaw. It was a jaw that did not know how to quit, even when it should have. He grunted, "You will be blown away." "Then tie a rope around my waist." He did not, but he let her follow. He held the lifeline, and she put her small, gloved hands on his coat, following him like a shadow. The cold in the barn was brutal, but it was still. The buckskin horse and the milk cow were islands of life in the frozen world. Wes moved with his usual economy, forking hay, breaking the ice in the water trough. Miriam did not wait to be told. She picked up the curry comb and began to work on the cow's matted hide. The cow, surprised, turned its head and lowed, but Miriam spoke to it, a soft, murmuring sound Wes could not catch. He watched her from the corner of his eye. Her hands, red and chapped, were gentle but firm. She was not afraid of the animal. She was not afraid of the work. When they returned to the cabin, stumbling through the snow, he saw her differently. She was not just a half-drowned bride. She was not just a victim. Beneath the terror, there was a core of something hard, something that matched the land itself. The silence between them began to change. It was no longer the empty, hollow silence of Wes's solitude. It was a full silence, heavy with unspoken things. There was a tension in the small room. It was the tension of two bodies moving in a space built for one. They bumped into each other when one reached for the wood pile and the other for the kettle. A brush of shoulders, the brief, electric touch of his hand against hers as he passed her a tin cup. Each time they would flinch, pulling back as if burned. He was a man who had not known a woman's touch in years. She was a woman who had only known a man's touch as a threat. But there were kindnesses, small, quiet acts that fell into the silence like stones in a deep well. He noticed her mending a tear in his old shirt, her stitches small and neat. The next day, he took his knife and cut a piece of leather from an old pair of boots, wordlessly offering it to her so she could patch the hole in her own worn-out shoe. She took to sweeping the hearth, keeping the small space obsessively clean. He took to making sure the log box beside her sleeping place was always full, so she would not be cold in the night. They lived this way for 3 days, or maybe it was 4. Time had no meaning. On what might have been the 4th day, the storm broke for an hour, the wind died, and a weak, watery sun appeared. Miriam rushed to the window, rubbing the frost from the glass. Outside, on the one bare branch of a wind-blasted tree, a small flock of snow finches had gathered. They were tiny, drab things, but they were alive. They hopped and chirped, a frantic scramble for survival. Miriam watched them, her hand pressed to the glass. She did not smile, exactly, but the hard, fearful line of her mouth softened. She watched them for a long time, until the clouds rolled back in and the snow began to fall again. Wes saw her. He saw the hunger in her eyes for something small, something living, something free. That afternoon, he sat in his chair, not sharpening a knife, but holding a new piece of pine. He worked slowly, his scarred, rough hands moving with a surprising, delicate grace. The blade slid and turned, and shavings fell to the floor. Miriam watched him, but he seemed lost in the wood. his brow furrowed in concentration. He worked for hours. As the light began to fail, he set the thing on the table. He did not look at her. He just got up and went to check the door latch. She crept closer. On the table sat a small wooden bird. It was no bigger than her thumb. He had carved it with its head tilted, its wings half furled, as if it were about to take flight. It was simple, but it was perfect. It was one of the finches from the tree. She picked it up. The wood was smooth, still warm from his hands. She traced the tiny, carved feathers with her finger. She did not know how to say thank you. The words, thank you, seemed too small for this. It was the first gift she had ever been given that did not come with a price. She looked at him. He was standing with his back to her, staring into the fire. She said nothing. She just closed her hand around the small bird, her fingers gripping it tight. That night, when she lay down on her blankets by the fire, she clutched it to her chest. The next day, Miriam was trying to bring order to the cabin. It was his space, and she felt like an intruder. She wanted to clean, to organize, to make herself useful. She was dusting the high, rough shelf above his cot when her fingers brushed against a small, leather-bound case. It was not hidden, but it was tucked away. She took it down. It was a daguerreotype. She fumbled with the small brass clasp and opened it. The image inside was stark and clear. A woman, with soft, dark hair and a gentle smile, looked out at her. She was not beautiful in the way of city women, but her face was full of light. Beside her, his hand in hers, stood a small boy. He was perhaps 4 years old, dressed in a stiff suit, his dark hair plastered down. He was not smiling. He had his father's eyes. Miriam's breath caught. She knew, with a sudden, aching certainty, who they were. This was the ghost that haunted the cabin. This was the source of his silence. The cabin door opened. Wes came in, shaking snow from his hat. He stopped dead. He saw her standing by his cot. He saw the open case in her hands. His face did not change. He did not get angry. He did not yell. He went very, very still. The air in the cabin crackled, and the temperature seemed to drop 20 degrees. "Put that down," he said. His voice was not his own. It was a flat, dead thing. "Wes, I am sorry. I was just—" "Leave it be." He strode over to her. He did not rip it from her grasp. He just took it, his fingers closing over hers for a second, cold and hard as steel. He snapped the case shut. He put it back on the shelf, his back to her. He stood there for a long moment. Then, without a word, he turned, grabbed his coat, and went back out into the storm. He left her alone in the cabin for hours. When he returned, he was half frozen, and he did not speak to her. He did not even look at her. He sat by the fire, sharpening his knife. The shing, shing, shing of the stone scraping on the steel, a sound that set her teeth on edge. The coldness from him was worse than the storm. It was a new kind of wall, one she did not know how to climb. That night, the silence was unbearable. It was no longer full, it was jagged. She was lying by the fire, the wooden bird clutched in her hand. He was sitting in his chair, staring into the flames, a rifle across his lap. She knew he was not sleeping. She had to break it. She had to make him see her as something other than an intruder who had touched his sacred wound. "My mother died," she whispered to the fire. He did not move. He gave no sign he had heard. "She died of a fever when I was 12. After that, my father, he just fell apart. He was a kind man, once, but he started to drink. He sold pieces of the farm, one by one. Then he started to borrow." She sat up, pulling her knees to her chest. She was talking to his back, to the rigid set of his shoulders. "He borrowed from Landon Cale," everyone warned him. "Mr. Cale is a rich man. He owns most of the valley. But he is not right. He buys things. He buys land. He buys cattle. He buys people." Wes's hand, the one on the rifle, tightened. "My father could not pay him back. So, Mr. Cale made him an offer. He would forgive the debt, and my father's name would be cleared. In exchange for me. She swallowed. The shame and anger, a thick sickness in her throat. I was a piece of property, a way to settle a bill. My father, he would not even look at me when he told me. He just said it was a good match. She paused, remembering. The night before the wedding, he came to the house, Landon. He touched me, and when I pulled away, he got angry. He said I would learn my place. He grabbed my wrists. She looked down at her own hands, at the faint, yellowing bruises that still circled them. He hit me, right here. She touched her temple, where the bruise had faded to a dull ache. It was not hard. It was like he was correcting a dog. It was then I knew. I knew that if I married him, I would die. Maybe not all at once, but I would die. So I ran. I took his horse, and I ran right into the storm. She finished, her voice trailing off into a sob. She had told him, all of it. Wes sat perfectly still. The only sound was the fire, the wind, and her quiet, broken crying. He did not turn. He did not offer a word of comfort. He just listened. After a long time, when her tears had run dry, he stood up. He put on his coat and his hat. He picked up his logging axe from by the door. Wes? She asked, her voice small with a new fear. Where are you going? He did not answer. He unbarred the door and walked out into the black, howling night. Miriam scrambled to the window, wiping the pain. She could barely see him in the swirling snow, a dark shape against the white. He was not leaving. He was walking to the woodpile. And then she heard it, even over the storm, the sound of the axe. Thwack! 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 It was a brutal, violent, rhythmic sound. He was not just chopping wood. He was attacking it. He was pouring every ounce of his silence, his memory and his rage into the splitting pine. He chopped for more than an hour, in the middle of a blizzard, in the dead of night. He chopped until a mountain of fresh wood lay split by his feet. He finally stumbled back inside, kicking the door shut. He was covered in snow, breathing like a winded bull. He threw the axe down. It clattered on the stones. He slumped into his chair by the fire, his head hanging. He just sat there, steam rising from his sweat-soaked shirt. Miriam looked at his hands. They were raw. He had worked until his calluses had torn open. They were blistered and bleeding, dripping red onto the floor. He did not seem to notice. He was lost in a darkness she could not reach. She got up. She went to the small box where he kept his supplies. She found clean rags and a small tin of pine pitch salve. She approached him slowly, as if he were a wolf. He was staring at his own ruined hands, his chest heaving. She knelt at his feet. He did not look up. Your hands, she whispered. She hesitated. This was a line. This was a man who did not want to be touched. But he was bleeding. She reached out and took his left hand. It was huge in her own, calloused and hard, stained with dirt and now with blood. He flinched, but he did not pull away. She poured a little water from the kettle onto a rag, wincing as she dabbed at the open wounds. He hissed, a sharp intake of breath. I am sorry, she murmured. It is nothing. His voice was a low rasp. She cleaned the blood away, her touch as light as she could make it. Then she took a small bit of the dark, sticky salve and began to work it gently into his torn palms. His hand was so warm. She could feel the pulse beating strong beneath his wrist. Her fingers lingered on his skin. Their hands, one small and pale, one large and scarred, were tangled together. He was looking at her. His eyes met hers. She saw the scar on his face, pulled tight by the firelight. She saw the storm in his eyes, the one that matched the storm outside. But beneath it, she saw something else. A deep, profound loneliness that matched her own. The cabin was silent, but for the fire. She finished wrapping the rag around his palm, tying it gently. She kept her eyes on her work, her heart hammering. "You're the first man," she murmured, her voice thick, "who didn't try to touch me." He was quiet for a long time. His other hand, the unwrapped one, came up. He did not touch her face. He just grazed her hair, a touch so light it was barely there. "You're the first woman," he replied, his voice gravelly, "who didn't run when she saw my scars." The moment stretched, fragile and heavy. She was kneeling between his knees, his hand in her lap. The distance between them was no more than a breath. She finally let go of his hand and sat back on her heels. The spell was broken, but the air in the room had changed. It was no longer jagged. It was charged. He looked at his wrapped hand. He looked at her. He looked at the narrow cot. "It is late," he said. He banked the fire for the night, the glow dropping to a dull red. The cabin grew cold, fast. The wind seemed to lunge at the walls, sensing a weakness. He nodded to the cot. "You take it, I will take the floor." "No," she said. "It is your bed. I have the hearth. It is warmer." "You will freeze," he said. "So will you." He looked at her, shivering in his oversized shirt. He looked at the narrow bed. He let out a long breath, a plume of white in the cold air. "We will both freeze if we sleep separate," he said. It was a simple, hard fact. "We share for warmth." Miriam's heart leaped. She looked at him, at the cot. It was barely wide enough for one. "All right," she whispered. The awkwardness was a third person in the room. She went first, climbing onto the cot and lying on the inside, her back to him, facing the cold log wall. She pulled the blanket up to her chin, her entire body rigid. She heard him take off his boots. The cot sagged as he lay down on top of the blankets, his back to her. For an hour, they lay like that, two stiff, separate bodies, shivering in the dark. The cold was a physical thing, a weight pressing down on them. Finally, Wes cursed, low and soft. "This is foolish." She heard him move, lifting the blankets. Then he was under them, behind her. He was a furnace. The heat rolling off his body was overwhelming. But she was still shivering. She was still rigid. He let out an exasperated sound. He shifted, his arm coming around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. It was not a lover's embrace. It was a practical, possessive act of survival. "Stop shaking," he growled, his voice a low rumble in her ear. "Go to sleep." She was pressed against him, from her shoulders to her knees. Her head was tucked just under his chin. She could feel the steady, slow beat of his heart against her back. He was solid, real. She was terrified. She was surrounded by a man. But this man had built her a fire. This man had given her a wooden bird. This man had not run when she told him her story. This man had wrapped, bleeding hands. Slowly, one muscle at a time, she let go. The tension that had held her rigid for 2 days, for weeks, for years, began to seep away. She let her head rest. She breathed in the scent of him, pine smoke and coffee and clean sweat. She felt the arm around her waist relax, his hand resting gently on her stomach. His breathing deepened. She was safe. The thought was so new, so strange. It was almost painful. She was not being hunted. She was not being judged. She was just warm. Curled into the back of this scarred, silent stranger, Miriam Hayes fell asleep. And beside her, Wes Coltrane, a man who had not known a single night of peace since his world had burned down, slept too. For the first time in years, neither of them dreamed. When Miriam awoke, the world was silent. The wind was gone. For days, the cabin had been a drum, the storm beating a constant, frantic rhythm against the wood. Now, there was nothing. The silence was so deep it was loud. She turned her head. Wes was gone. The cot beside her was empty, the blanket folded. She sat up, the cold air hitting her. She was still wearing his clothes. She looked down at her hands, clutching the small wooden bird he had carved. She had slept with it pressed to her chest, a tiny, hard talisman against the dark. She heard a scrape outside. Wes was on the roof, his back to the sun, shoveling the massive drift of snow away from the chimney. The light that came through the newly cleared window was blinding, a sharp, brilliant white that made her squint. The storm had passed. She got up, her movements stiff. She added a log to the fire, her heart a heavy, cold knot in her stomach. The storm was over. The man who had been her shelter, her accidental guardian, had no more obligation to her. The pact was finished. When he came back inside, shaking snow from his shoulders, she was standing by the door. She had gathered the few things she had, which was nothing, just his clothes on her back. "The storm is done," she said. Her voice was thin. He nodded, not looking at her. He moved to the stove to check the coffee pot. "It is. I cannot thank you," she said, and her voice cracked. "For the food, for the warmth. I will not bring any more trouble to your door." Wes turned, the coffee pot in his hand. He looked at her. He saw the borrowed trousers, the shirt that drowned her. He saw the fear back in her eyes, the hunted look that had been missing for the last 2 days. He saw her resolve. He had lived by a code for a long time. You do not hold on to what is not yours. You do not ask people to stay who mean to leave. He set the pot down. He just nodded, his face carved from granite. He opened the door for her. The light that flooded in was painful. It was a new world, pristine and terrible. The snow was not just snow. It was a landscape reborn. It was piled in drifts higher than his head, sculpted by the wind into waves and cliffs of solid white. The sun on it was like a million broken mirrors. Miriam stepped outside. She sank to her waist. The snow was not powder. It was a thick, heavy crust, but not strong enough to hold her. She gasped as the cold soaked through his trousers, biting at her skin. She looked around. There was no trail. There was no road. There was no sign that human beings had ever walked this earth. The plains were gone, buried. The mountains were a distant, jagged line of blue. She could not tell north from south. She could not see anything but white, an endless, blinding, beautiful, and deadly expanse of white. The cabin, the small log hut she had stumbled upon, was the only thing in the entire world. She tried to take another step, fighting the sucking, heavy snow. She managed 3 steps. She was breathing hard, her lungs burning. The cold was a physical thing, a giant hand squeezing the air from her. She was not just lost, she was erased. Landon Cale was out there, somewhere, but this vast, cold, empty land was a more immediate monster. It would kill her before he ever could. A sob broke from her, a dry, ragged sound. She had run from a man only to be caught by the world. She turned back. She could not even see her own footprints from the night she arrived. They were buried under 6 feet of snow. She stumbled, fell, and crawled her way back to the small patch of clear ground Wes had shoveled by the door. She collapsed against the rough wood, her face in her hands, and she wept. She cried with the full, hopeless despair of a person who had finally, truly, run out of road. The door opened. She did not look up. She just felt the warmth from inside touch her back. Wes stood there. He had watched her. He had watched her fight the snow, and he had watched the snow win. He didn't say, "I told you so." He did not say anything. He bent down. He put one arm around her back, the other under her knees, and he lifted her, just as he had the first night. But this time, it was different. The first time, she had been a terrified, half-frozen stranger. Now, she knew the feel of his hands. He carried her inside and kicked the door shut. He did not set her down by the fire. He just held her. And this time, she did not resist. She did not flinch. She did not cower. She acted. She wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her face against his cold coat, and she held on to him as if he were the only solid thing left on earth. He stood there in the middle of the room, holding her, letting her cry. He held her weight. He took the shudders that racked her body. His hand, the one he had hurt, the one she had bandaged, came up and rested on the back of her head, protective. "It is all right," he murmured, his voice a low rumble. "You are all right. I got you." He held her until the last sob had quieted, until she was just clinging to him, breathing. That embrace changed the shape of the room. It changed the silence. When he finally set her down, the line between them, the line of stranger and guest, of rescuer and victim, was gone. They were just Wes and Miriam. The days that followed were different. They were no longer two people trapped. They were two people, living. They fell into a new rhythm, a shared one. They cooked together. He taught her how to check his snare lines, and she took it on as her own chore. She found a sack of flour he had forgotten, and one night she made biscuits, dense and salty, baked in the cast-iron pan by the fire. He ate 3 of them without a word, but when he was done, he looked at her, and the smallest, rustiest smile cracked the corner of his mouth. Miriam stared. The smile changed his whole face. It softened the scar. It lit the darkness in his eyes. She felt a strange flutter in her chest, and she laughed. It was a small sound, airy and weak, like a bird testing its wings after a storm, but it was a laugh. The sound startled them both. They just looked at each other for a beat, the shared smile and the echo of her laugh hanging in the air. That night, the silence felt comfortable. Wes was cleaning his rifle, the lamplight glinting off the oiled steel. Miriam was patching the knee of his trousers, the one she had claimed as her own. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small, battered harmonica. He looked at it for a moment, as if deciding. Then he put it to his lips. He played. The tune was simple, slow, and full of sorrow. It was a high, lonely sound, a cowboy's lament for a lost home or a lost love. His skill was rough, the notes bending flat, but the feeling was pure. Miriam stopped sewing. She listened, her head bowed. The music filled the cabin, painting pictures of wide-open plains and long, dark nights. He finished, the last note fading into the crackle of the fire. He lowered the harmonica, looking embarrassed. "I am out of practice." "It is beautiful," she whispered. "Please, play it again." He looked at her, and he did. He played the simple tune again. This time, his eyes stayed on her. When he finished, he did not put the harmonica away. He set it on the table. He stood up. He walked over to her. He stood in front of her for a long second. Then, he held out his hand, the one she had bandaged. She looked at his hand. She looked at his face. This was a question. She put down her sewing. She placed her small, chapped hand into his large, scarred one. He pulled her gently to her feet. He put his other arm around her waist, drawing her close. She rested her hand on his shoulder, and they danced. There was no music, save the memory of the tune. They just swayed, 2 steps this way, 2 steps that way, on the rough plank floor in the middle of the cabin. She rested her head against his chest. She could feel his heart, steady and strong, beneath her ear. He smelled of pine smoke and leather. He was so solid. He was not Landon Cale, all soft edges and cruel intent. Wes was a man made of hard lines, but there was no cruelty in him, only a deep, abiding sadness. They danced until the fire burned low. It was not a dance of passion. It was a dance of comfort. It was a dance that said, "We are here. We are alive. We are not alone." They broke apart slowly. Later, as she was laying out the blankets on the cot, they had shared it every night since, but the wall of his back had always been between them. She looked at the shelf. The leather daguerreotype was there. "He had your eyes," she said softly. Wes, who was banking the fire, froze. He turned. "The boy, Thomas, he had your eyes." Wes stared at her. He had been ready to snap, to shut her down, but she had not asked a question. She had stated a fact. She had seen his son. He sat down heavily in his chair. The firelight played over his face, making the scar pulse. "His name was Thomas," Wes said, his voice flat. "My wife was Eliza." He picked up a piece of kindling, turning it over and over in his hands. "This cabin," he said, "was hers. She wanted to be away from the towns. She loved the silence." He told her. He told her about the life before. He had not always been a hermit. He had been a sheriff in a mining town in Colorado, a place full of mud and gold, and men who would kill you for either. "I was good at it," he said, his voice hollow. "I was good at facing down the hard men. I thought that made me strong." He told her about the Walton gang, horse thieves and murderers. He had hunted them for months. He had arrested the youngest brother. The other two had sworn vengeance. "I got word they were holed up in a canyon, 10 miles east. I took my deputy. We rode out." He stared into the fire, but he was seeing that canyon. "It was a trap. They led us on a chase, a fool's errand. They just wanted me gone." He stopped. The hand holding the kindling was white-knuckled. "While I was gone," he whispered. "They rode into town, but they did not come for the bank. They came for my house." Miriam put her hand over her mouth. "They came for her, for Eliza, for my boy." His voice broke. Just for a second. A raw crack in the stone. "When I got back, when I rode back, there was just smoke. They burned it all, with them inside." He closed his eyes. "I found them later, the Waltons. I found them, but it did not matter. It did not change anything. I got this." He touched the scar on his face. "From the last one. I should have died with him, but I did not." He looked up at her, his eyes a bleak, empty winter. "I came here, to her cabin. I am cursed, Miriam. Everyone I am meant to protect, I fail. Everyone I get close to, they pay the price. It is better I am alone. It is safer for everyone else." He had finished. His secret, the great dark engine of his solitude, was out. He waited for her to pity him. He waited for her to move away, to see the rot in him. Miriam did not move away. She moved closer. She knelt in front of his chair, just as she had when she bandaged his hands. She looked at his face, at the pain that was so old it was part of his bones. She reached out and touched his hand. "You did not fail them," she said, her voice fierce. He flinched. "I was not there." "You were doing your job," she insisted. "You cannot be in all places. You cannot stop the evil in the world. Wes, you can only stand against it. And you did." She looked him square in the eye. "Landon Cale is evil. I ran from him. Does that make me a failure? I ran to save my own life." She squeezed his hand. "You did not fail them. You stayed alive. Sometimes, staying alive is the hardest part. It takes more courage than dying." He stared at her. He had carried his guilt like a shroud for 6 years. He had let it define him, freeze him, bury him alive in this cabin. And she, in one breath, had offered him not pity, but absolution. She had called his greatest shame courage. He did not know what to do with that. He just looked at her, this small, bruised woman who had more strength in her than any man he had ever known. He lifted his other hand, the one that was not holding hers. He touched her cheek. His thumb was rough, calloused, but his touch was light as a moth's wing. She did not flinch. She did not pull away. She leaned into his palm, closing her eyes. The silence in the cabin was no longer empty. It was charged. It was alive. He leaned in. He was slow. He was giving her every chance to turn away. She did not turn. His lips met hers. It was not a kiss of passion. It was a kiss of discovery. It was hesitant, a brief, shy press of his mouth to hers. It was just a touch, but it was electric. A jolt of life, of warmth, of feeling, in a world that had been frozen for so long. He pulled back, just an inch. Their eyes met. A soft snow had begun to fall outside, the flakes drifting past the window, muffling the world in a new layer of peace. That night, when they went to the cot, it was different. Miriam lay down, but she did not turn her back to the wall. She lay facing the room. She lay facing him. Wes lay down beside her. They were face to face in the dim red glow of the fire's embers. He touched her face again, tracing the line of her jaw. "Miriam," he whispered. It was just her name, but it held everything. She lifted her hand, covering his. He leaned in and kissed her again. This time, it was not so hesitant. It was a question. She answered, her lips softening under his. He moved slowly. Every touch was a question. His hand moving from her cheek to her neck, his fingers tangling in her hair, her hands moving from his arm to his broad shoulders. This was not the greedy, cruel taking that Miriam had fled. It was not the hurried, desperate passion of a lonely man. It was quiet. It was like a prayer. When he unbuttoned the flannel shirt she wore, his hands were shaking, and when she touched the bare skin of his chest, she felt the frantic hammering of his heart. They made love like two survivors, rediscovering a forgotten language. It was a slow, healing exploration. It was about finding solace, not release. It was about one broken soul reaching for another. It was, at last, an answer. Afterward, they did not pull apart. They lay tangled in the blankets, her head on his chest, his arms wrapped tight around her, as if he could weld them together. The cabin was warm. The silence was perfect. He held her for a long time. He thought of the world outside. He thought of the man named Cale. He thought of the promise he had made to himself, to never care again. And he knew he had broken it. He kissed the top of her head. "I will not let him find you," he vowed, his voice a rough promise in the dark. "I will not let anyone hurt you again, no matter what comes." Miriam sighed, a small, sad sound against his skin. She burrowed closer. "I do not deserve it," she whispered. It was the old shame, the voice of her father, the voice of Landon Cale, the voice that said she was worthless, a debt to be paid. Wes pulled her chin up, forcing her to look at him in the dim light. His eyes were fierce. "Yes, you do," he said, his voice hard with a conviction that shook her to the core. "You deserve more. You deserve more than this world ever gave you." The world, for a time, felt new. The great, oppressive white of the storm had given way to a world of sharp edges and blinding blue sky. The snow began to melt, slowly, grudgingly, revealing the tough brown grass beneath. Inside the cabin, the thaw was happening, too. Wes and Miriam had settled into a life. It was a life lived in a single room, but it felt larger than any world they had known before. They worked. He taught her to shoot the Winchester, her shoulder bruised from the kick, but her eye true. She taught him about the herbs she recognized pushing up through the thaw, plants her mother had used for healing. They talked, not always in full sentences. Sometimes it was just a look, a shared moment watching the sunset paint the snow drifts pink. He would play the harmonica, and she would hum along. The small cabin filled with a fragile, tentative peace. He had not touched her again, not in the way of a lover, but he touched her all the time, a hand on her back to guide her over a slick patch of ice, his fingers brushing hers as he passed her a hot cup. They slept in the cot every night, but now they slept facing each other, a quiet acknowledgement. The peace was a thin sheet of ice over deep, fast-running water. They both knew it. The outside world had to come. "We are low," Wes said one morning, looking at the near-empty flour sack. "Coffee is gone. I need to go to town." Miriam's breath hitched. Town. The word was a threat. "'Ten sleep," he said. "It is a full day's ride. I will be gone 2 days. You will be safe here. No one knows this place."
"I am coming with you," she said.
"No, it is too dangerous."
"It is more dangerous to be alone,"
she said, her voice quiet but unbending.
"We do this together, Wes, or not at all."
He looked at her. The woman who had collapsed on his porch was gone. In her place was this person, strong-boned and clear-eyed, wearing his old trousers as if they were armor. He nodded. Once. Together, then. He did not know that the world was already coming for them. Miles away. In the muddy, half-thawed streets of Tensleep, a man named Silas Croft pushed his way into the general store. He was a trapper, smelling of beaver fat and wood smoke, and he had come down from the high country with a load of prime pelts. He was waiting for the storekeep to weigh his furs when he saw the paper, nailed to the wall by the door. It was a reward poster, not for a man, but for a woman. Missing. It read in thick, black letters. Miriam Hayes, 20 years of age, dark hair, slight build, believed to be wandering in a state of confusion. Fled from her lawful husband. Silas squinted. The description was vague, but the name at the bottom was not Landon Cale. And the reward was $500, enough to make a man stop and think.
"Cale,"
Silas muttered. He knew that name. A big man, back east of the mountains. He ran things. He thought back, a month ago, before the big storm. He had been trapping near Coltrane's Hollow. He had seen the hermit, and then, just before the snows hit, he had heard a rumor, a rider, nearly frozen, had seen smoke from Coltrane's cabin, and he swore he had seen a woman's face in the window. Silas had dismissed it. Coltrane? The man was a ghost. Now, he looked at the poster. State of confusion, he read. Lawful husband, $500. He pocketed his fur money, bought a small bag of beans, and walked straight to the telegraph office. He was not a man to get involved in other folks' trouble, but $500 was not trouble. It was a fortune. A week later, Landon Cale arrived. He did not ride into Tensleep like a rancher. He arrived in a covered carriage, the kind Easterners used, pulled by 2 fine-looking black horses. It was clean, despite the muddy roads. He stepped out, and the men on the boardwalk stopped to watch. He was not a man of the West. He wore a black wool suit, a white shirt, and a string tie. He was clean-shaven, his face pale and a little soft, but his eyes were flat and gray, like stones at the bottom of a cold river. 2 men rode behind him. They were not soft. They were the kind of men who wore their guns low and tied down. They had hard, sun-scorched faces, and they watched everything, their hands never straying far from their hips. Cale did not go to the saloon. He went to the small house of Judge Harlan. He was there for an hour. When he came out, he and his men rode out of town, heading west, toward the mountains, toward Wes Coltrane's land. Back at the cabin, Miriam was outside, hanging their washed blankets on a rope line Wes had strung. The air was warmer, and she felt a sliver of hope. Maybe they could. She heard it first, the jingle of harness, the clop of horses. Not one, several.
"Wes,"
she whispered. He was splitting wood. He dropped the axe. He moved, fast, into the cabin. He came out a second later with the Winchester in one hand, his revolver strapped to his hip. He stood in front of her. "Get inside."
"No,"
she said, her voice shaking but her feet planted. The riders came over the rise. The man in the black suit. The 2 gunmen fanned out, flanking him. Miriam stopped breathing. It was him. Landon Cale reined in his horse, 10 yards from them. He looked at the small cabin, at Wes, at the rifle. He looked at Miriam, standing there in men's clothing, her hair loose. His face did not change, but a small, dark flush rose up his neck. "Miriam, my dear," he said. His voice was smooth, educated. It cut through the clean air like something filthy. "You have caused a great deal of trouble. Your father has been worried sick. Stay away from me. Land in, Miriam said. Her voice was a reedy thing, but she said it. Wes stepped forward, the rifle held easy, pointed at the ground. This is my land. You are not welcome here. Turn around. Cale smiled. It was a small, thin smile that did not touch his eyes. He ignored Wes, speaking only to Miriam. I'm disappointed, my dear. Running off, living in this squalor, with this man. He finally turned his gaze to Wes. It was a look of pure dismissal, like a man looking at a bug. You are Wes Coltrane. I have heard of you, the disgraced sheriff who let his family die. A fitting companion for a runaway. Wes's face went white, his hand tightening on the rifle. She is not going with you, Wes said, his voice a low growl. She is, Cale said. He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a packet of papers. Because she is my wife. Legally. We were married by proxy the day after she fled. Her father signed the papers. It is all quite binding. He tossed the papers onto the muddy snow. She belongs to me, and you, sir, are a kidnapper, an abductor. He is lying, Miriam cried, grabbing Wes's arm. He is lying. It does not matter if he is, Wes said, his voice tight. He has the law on his side, or he has bought it. Cale's smile widened. I have indeed. I am not here to trade bullets with you. Coltrane, I am here to reclaim my property. We will settle this in town, before Judge Harlan, or, he nodded to his men. We will settle it here. I do not much care which. Wes looked at the two men. Their hands were on their guns. They were ready. He was one man. He might get one. He would not get both. And Miriam would be in the crossfire. He was trapped. We will go to town, Wes said. His jaw clenched so hard a muscle jumped. A wise choice. Cale motioned with his head. One of the gunmen dismounted, pulling a rope from his saddle. No, Wes said. We ride our own, no ropes. Cale considered him. Very well. But know this, if you try to run, my men will shoot your horse first, and you second, and my dear wife, I will just drag her back behind my saddle. The ride to Ten Sleep was the longest of Wes's life. He rode his buckskin, Miriam riding the pack mule. Cale and his men rode around them, like wolves herding sheep. Miriam's eyes were fixed on Wes's back. He sat tall, rigid. He did not look back at her. He could not. To look at her was to show the rage and the fear that was coiling in his gut. When they hit the main street of Ten Sleep, the town was waiting. Silas Croft's telegram had been the talk of the week. Now, the story had arrived. Faces peered from windows. Men stopped in the street. The gossip followed them like a cloud of flies. That is him, Coltrane, the hermit. And the woman, look at her, dressed like a man. Heard he stole her right from her wedding. She is a whore, plain and simple. Ran off with that scarred-up outlaw. Shameful. The words hit Miriam like stones. She flinched, her face pale, her hands gripping the mule's saddle horn. Wes heard it all. His face was a mask of cold fury. They were marched to the small building that served as the courthouse. But Judge Harlan was already there, waiting. He was a man with a soft belly and a network of broken red veins on his nose. He was already sweating, though the air was cool. Mr. Cale, the judge said, his voice slick and eager. I have reviewed your papers. Everything seems to be in order. Excellent. Judge, Cale said. We can settle this quickly. I want my wife returned, and I want this man, he pointed at Wes, arrested for abduction. Now, hold on, Wes said, his voice ringing out. She is not his wife. She fled him because he is a cruel, violent man. These are baseless accusations, Cale sputtered, his face turning red. Judge, Wes said, this woman has a right to speak. You have to hold a hearing. Judge Harlan looked at Cale. Cale gave a small, impatient nod. He wanted this done right. He wanted it to look legal. Very well, the judge said. A hearing. Tomorrow, 10 in the morning, at the saloon. It is the only place big enough. Marshal, take Mr. Coltrane and the woman to the hotel. See they remain there. They were given a room. A guard was posted outside the door. As soon as the door closed, Wes turned to Miriam. They will not listen. The judge is bought. The town is against us. Cale will walk out of there with you.
So what do we do?
She whispered, her hands shaking. Tonight, Wes said, his voice low.
When the guard changes, the window in this room looks out over the alley. It is a one-story drop. We run into the high country where he cannot follow.
Miriam looked at him, at the man who had promised to protect her. He was offering her an escape. He was offering to go back into the wild, to become a true outlaw. For her. She walked to the window. She looked down at the muddy alley. She could hear the saloon, loud with men talking about them, calling her names. She thought of running for the rest of her life, hiding, always looking over her shoulder, always being the whore bride who ran. She turned around. Her eyes were not afraid. They were burning. No, she said. Wes stared at her.
Miriam, this is not a fight we can win. Not this way.
You said I deserve more, she said, her voice shaking but gaining strength. You said I deserve more than this world ever gave me. If I run now, I am proving them right. I am proving Cale right. That I am just property. That I am a coward. She walked up to him, close. I will not cower again. I will not hide in the dark. I am not that girl you found in the snow. Not anymore. You said I deserve more.
Let me fight for it.
He looked into her eyes, and he saw a fire he had never seen before. It was the fire he had seen in himself, long ago, before his world had burned. She was not just fighting for her life. She was fighting for her soul. He nodded, a slow, grim acceptance. All right, we fight, but we will need allies.
How?
She asked. The guard is at the door. He will not be there all night. Wes was right. At 2 in the morning, the guard was replaced by a sleepy deputy who quickly found comfort in a chair and a bottle. Wes waited until the snoring started. He worked the lock on the door with his pocket knife, the one he had used to carve the bird. It took him 10 minutes, but the latch finally clicked. He slipped out, a ghost in the dark hallway. He went first to the smithy, at the edge of town. A light was on. Elias Thorne, the blacksmith, was working late, the ring of his hammer a lonely sound in the night. Elias was a huge, bearded man, built like his own anvil. He owed Wes, years ago. Wes, as sheriff, had saved his claim from a crew of swindlers. Elias looked up, hammer in hand, as Wes slipped into the smithy. Coltrane, heard you were in town. Heard you brought trouble.
I need help. Elias,
Wes said. Cale is a bad man. The blacksmith grunted, turning a piece of glowing iron. But he is a rich one, and he has the judge in his pocket. I am not asking you to fight him. I am asking you to stand up, to listen, at the hearing tomorrow. Elias stopped hammering. He looked at Wes.
Just listen? And if you hear the truth, you stand by it.
The blacksmith spat into the coals. I will be there. Wes left. He moved through the back alleys to the cluster of shacks by the river, where the people the town did not want lived. He stopped at a small, neat cabin. He knocked, a soft, precise rhythm. The door opened a crack. A dark eye peered out. It was a native woman, her face weathered, her black hair streaked with gray. Her name was Dove. Wes had found her one winter, half dead from starvation after her tribe had been moved on. He had given her half his supplies, no questions asked. She had lived here ever in, speaking to no one, but seeing everything. Dove, he said. She opened the door. He stepped inside. He was there for half an hour. When he left, she had given him what she had, information. He had one last stop, a small house, tidy and clean. with a white fence. The home of Sarah Beckett. Miriam had told him about her, a widow she had met on the road, whose wagon wheel had broken. Miriam had stayed with her for hours, comforting her, helping her fix it. Wes knocked. The widow, a woman in her 40s with kind, tired eyes, opened the door.
Mr. Coltrane, what on earth?
Ma'am, I am here about Miriam Hayes. He told her the story. He told her what Miriam was up against. The widow's face grew pale.
Landon Cale? I knew it. I knew that name. My brother, back in St. Louis. He was in business with a man of that name. A land deal. It was all a fraud. It ruined him.
My brother wrote me. He said Cale was a monster, a criminal who hid behind lawyers and paper.
Will you say that?
Wes asked. At the hearing. Sarah Beckett looked at her hands. To speak against Landon Cale was to risk everything. But she thought of the young woman who had sat with her by the side of the road, who had shared her thin blanket.
I will,
she said. The next morning, the saloon was packed. It smelled of stale beer and unwashed bodies. Judge Harlan sat at a table at the front, Cale beside him, looking cool and confident. His 2 gunmen stood by the door. Wes and Miriam stood alone. This is a hearing, the judge announced, to confirm the marital contract between Mr. Landon Cale and Miriam Hayes.
This is a lie,
Miriam's voice rang out, clear and strong. The room went silent. All eyes turned to her. She was in her borrowed men's clothes, but she stood tall, her head high.
This man did not marry me.
He bought me. My father sold me to him to pay a debt. She told her story. She did not stumble. She spoke of the bruises. She spoke of the night he hit her. She spoke of the fear and why she ran. I ran because I'm a human being, not a piece of property to be beaten and used. I will not go with him. I would rather die. A murmur went through the crowd. Cale stood up, his face a mask of polite concern.
Judge, as you can see, the poor girl is hysterical. She is unwell. She fell from her horse and struck her head.
This is all fantasy. I have the papers. I am her husband. I only wish to take her home and see she gets the care she needs. He is the one who is lying, Wes said, his voice a low growl. He stepped forward. This man is not a concerned husband. He is a criminal. Wes laid out what Dove had told him. He spoke of Cale's cattle deals, of forged brands, of homesteaders who had been mysteriously burned out, their land bought for pennies by a holding company Cale owned.
He is not just a bully, Wes said. He is a thief.
These are slanderous, baseless lies, Cale shouted, his composure finally breaking.
They are not lies,
a new voice said.
Sarah Beckett, the widow, walked to the front. My name is Sarah Beckett, and this man, Landon Cale, he ruined my brother. He is a fraud. I have the letters to prove it.
She held them up. The room was buzzing. The judge was pounding his gavel. Elias the blacksmith stood up, his massive arms crossed, glaring at the judge. Order! Order! The judge yelled. He was sweating, his eyes darting to Cale. The mood in the room had turned. The townsfolk were looking at Cale with suspicion.
This is not a trial for fraud, the judge declared. This is a hearing about a contract. I have seen the papers. They are legal. I rule in favor of Mr. Cale. He has the right to take his wife.
It was chaos. Cale, his face pale with rage, lunged for Miriam.
Come here, you...
Wes moved. He put himself between them, his hand shoving Cale hard in the chest. She is not going anywhere with you, Wes said. They were outside now, the crowd spilling onto the boardwalk. Cale, enraged, his mask of civility gone, snarled, "You will not stop me." He reached inside his coat. He was fast. He pulled a small, silver-plated derringer. But Wes was faster. He had been a sheriff. His hand shot out, not for his own gun, but for Cale's wrist. He grabbed it, twisting, slamming Cale's hand against a wooden support post. The derringer clattered to the boardwalk. Wes and Cale were locked in a struggle. One of Cale's hired men, the one who had been watching, still by the door, smiled. He had been paid for this. He drew his revolver, a smooth, practiced motion. He did not aim at Cale. He aimed at Wes. He fired. The shot was deafening. It echoed off the storefronts. Everything stopped. Wes grunted. A sharp, sudden sound. He let go of Cale. He looked down, a strange surprise on his face. A dark, wet circle was blooming on his shirt, high on his left shoulder, near his chest. He stumbled back. His knees hit the boardwalk. "Wes!" Miriam screamed. It was not a sound of fear. It was a sound of pure, primal rage. Cale, free, saw his chance. He grabbed for Miriam's arm. "Now, you see?" Elias Thorne, the blacksmith, stepped forward and shoved Cale with one massive hand, sending him sprawling into the mud. "Get out of here, you snake!" Miriam did not see it. She was already on her knees beside Wes. He had fallen onto his side, his face pale, his eyes unfocused. The snow in the street was muddy, but the blood flowing from his wound was bright red. It was pumping, fast. "No, no, no," she whispered, pressing her hands to the wound. The hot blood just spilled over her fingers, soaking her. "Wes, stay with me! Stay with me!" His eyes tried to focus on her. "Miriam!" "Someone get the doctor!" Elias yelled. "The town doc is drunk by now," a man said. "He is useless." "He's bleeding out," Sarah Beckett cried. Miriam looked up, her face streaked with tears and his blood. "Doctor. Albright, the good doctor. He lived 10 miles out, at the old mission." "Wes was dying, right here in the mud, in front of her." She looked at Cale, who was scrambling to his feet, his 2 gunmen closing around him. She looked at Wes, his breathing shallow. She stood up. She ran, not at Cale, but at Wes's buckskin, still hitched at the rail. She untied the reins, her hands shaking so badly she could barely do it. She threw herself onto its back, pulling herself into the saddle. Where is she going? She kicked the horse, hard, spinning it around. She galloped down the street, mud flying, scattering the crowd. Cale, his face black with fury, raised his arm. "Stop her! Shoot the horse!" The gunman raised his pistol, but Elias Thorne picked up a wagon yoke and took 1 step toward him. "You try it." The gunman hesitated. It was all the time Miriam needed. She was out of town, a desperate, frantic rider, bent low over the horse's neck, disappearing into the twilight. Cale and his men, seeing the entire town now turned against them, mounted their horses and rode out. Heading east, they were gone. Miriam rode through the night. She rode until the horse was lathered, until her lungs burned. She found the doctor, a cranky old man, and hammered on his door until he came. She did not beg. She demanded. They rode back in the dark. Wes was not in the street. They had carried him to the blacksmith's shop. He was lying on a workbench, white as a sheet. Sarah Beckett was beside him, pressing clean rags to the wound. "He is still breathing," the widow said, "but just—" The doctor shoved Miriam aside. "Get me light and hot water and whiskey, for him and for me." It was a long, terrible night. Miriam stood in the corner of the smithy, watching as the doctor worked with his probes and knives, digging for the bullet. The smell of blood and iron and whiskey filled the air, and twice, Wes's breathing stopped. Twice, the doctor cursed and pressed on his chest, forcing the air back in. Miriam did not cry. She just watched, her hands clenched, the wooden bird still clutched in her fist. As the first gray light of dawn touched the forge, the doctor finally straightened up. He was covered in blood. He held a flattened piece of lead in his forceps. "It is out," he grumbled. "It missed the artery, by a hair. It shattered the bone, but it missed the artery." He looked at Wes, who was breathing, a shallow, ragged breath.
He is a tough man. He is alive.
Miriam sagged against the wall, her legs finally giving out. But he is not out of it, the doctor said, wiping his hands. He has lost too much blood, and the infection, it will come. The next few days. It will be a fight. It is in God's hands now. Miriam pushed herself up. She walked to the workbench. She looked down at Wes's pale, scarred face. He had survived, barely. She took his hand. It was cold. She sat on the stool beside him, her face grim. God may have had a hand in it, but she would be there too. She would not let him go. Wes Coltrane did not die, but for many days he hovered in a gray, shallow place between the living and the dead. He lay on a cot in a small, clean room behind Elias Thorne's smithy. The blacksmith had insisted. The hotel is Cale's. The town doc is a drunk. He stays here. I will keep watch. Miriam did not leave his side. She was a small, fierce ghost in the smoke-scented room. She slept in a chair, her hand on his arm, as if she could hold him to the world by sheer force of will. She learned to change his bandages, her hands steady, her stomach tight. She saw the shattered bone, the angry, torn meat of the wound. She washed him, spooned broth into his mouth when he would take it, and sat, just sat, and watched him breathe. Sarah Beckett, the widow, was their link to the town. She brought food, real food, bread and stew and milk. She brought news. Cale and his men are gone, she reported on the third day, her voice low. They rode east, fast. The town is ashamed. They listened to his money, and it almost got a man killed. They will be back, Wes whispered. He was awake, his eyes cloudy with laudanum, his voice a dry rasp. You rest, Mr. Coltrane, Sarah said, patting his good hand. Elias and I, we are watching. Wes's recovery was a slow, agonizing crawl. The fever the doctor had warned of came, a low-grade fire that left him sweating and shivering. But it was not the killing kind. Not yet. Miriam kept cool cloths on his head, her touch gentle. In his lighter moments, he would watch her. He watched her move through the small room, her motions quick and efficient. He saw the dark circles under her eyes, the stubborn set of her jaw. She was not the same woman he had found. The storm had forged her into something new. You should go, he breathed one afternoon. The pain was bad. Before they come back, take my horse. Go north. Find a new name. Miriam stopped wringing out a cloth. She looked at him, her eyes flashing. You think I would run, now, after you stood for me? I am a liability, he said, his eyes closing in a spasm of pain. You are a man who stood for me, she repeated, her voice fierce. And I will not leave you, so you can stop telling me to just heal. He did not ask again. He grew stronger. He could sit up. He could walk, leaning on Elias. A few steps around the smithy. The color was coming back to his face. A week passed, then 2. The peace was broken on a Tuesday. Elias came into the room, his face grim. He did not say anything. He just handed Wes a piece of paper. It was a warrant, a new one, issued by Judge Harlan. Cale's men are back, Elias said, his voice a low rumble. Not Cale, just his hired guns. And they brought this. It is for your arrest. Wes for assaulting Mr. Cale, and for abducting his wife. It is all legal, all signed by the judge. They have posted it in the saloon. They are giving you until sundown to turn yourself in, or they will come and get you. Miriam felt the blood drain from her face. But the town knows. They know he is a liar. Knowing and acting are two different things. Girl, Elias grunted. The town may not like Cale, but that paper is law. And those 2 gunmen, they are not looking for a trial. They are looking for an excuse. If Wes resists, they will shoot him dead. Resisting arrest, it is a clean kill. Wes folded the paper. His hand was shaking, but not from weakness, from rage.
"They cannot take you," Miriam whispered.
"No," Wes said. He looked at Elias. "How long?"
"They are in the saloon, drinking, making a show of it. You have an hour, maybe 2.
"Sarah," Wes said. "Tell her thank you." "She is already packing," Elias said. He pointed to a pile in the corner. Saddlebags, 2 rifles, ammunition, blankets, dried meat. "Where will you go?" Elias asked. Wes looked at Miriam, then back to the smith.
"The high country, the Uintas, it is rough.
"They will not follow us far.
Not this time of year."
"It will be hard," Elias said. "You are not healed." "I am healed enough," Wes said. He pushed himself to his feet, his jaw set, his left arm held stiffly against his body in a sling Miriam had made. Elias nodded. He brought the horses to the back door of the smithy, the buckskin for Wes, and a sturdy mule, the one Miriam had ridden before. "It is all I could get. Godspeed. Wes." Miriam grabbed the bags. Wes, his face pale with the effort, pulled himself into the saddle. He looked down at her. "This is it, Miriam. Once we ride, there is no coming back. Not for a long time. It will be a hard life." She did not hesitate. She put her foot in the stirrup and swung herself onto the mule. She looked at him, her eyes as steady as the mountains they were heading for. "Then let us go." They rode out the back of the smithy, down the alley, and across the river, keeping the town to their backs. They did not look back. They pushed the animals hard, heading west, climbing into the wild, broken land that few men dared to enter. The wilderness was a harsh master. The first few days, Wes was so weak he could barely stay in the saddle. The movement, the cold, the strain it set his wound to throbbing, a dull, fiery ache that drained him of all strength. They made cold camps. No fire. The smoke could be seen for miles. Miriam took charge. She was the one who unsaddled the animals. She was the one who laid out the bedrolls. She was the one who held Wes as he shivered, his teeth chattering. "You have to eat," she would command, pressing a piece of dried jerky into his hand. He would chew, his face a mask of pain, and obey. He watched her. He saw her hands, raw and chapped from the cold rope. He saw her face, thin from a lack of food. But her eyes were alive. She was not afraid. She was focused. As he regained a fraction of his strength, he began to teach her. "We cannot survive on what we carry," he said, his voice low. They were camped in a thick stand of pine. "We have to hunt. We have to trap." He took out the second rifle Elias had packed. It was lighter than his Winchester, a small carbine. "You know how to load it. Now, you learn to see." He taught her to read the snow for tracks, a rabbit, a grouse. He taught her how to build a snare from a bit of wire. He taught her how to walk without sound, placing her feet heel to toe. "You shoot, you breathe out," he instructed, his voice in her ear, his good arm coming around to steady her aim. "Squeeze, do not pull. Let it surprise you." Her first shot was a clean miss. The sound cracked through the silent woods. "Again," he said. She reloaded. She breathed. She squeezed. The grouse exploded in a puff of feathers. Miriam stared, her heart pounding. She had taken a life. "Good," Wes said, a rare note of approval in his voice. "Now you clean it." She proved to be more than capable. She was strong. She was resilient. She did not complain about the cold, or the hunger, or the hard ground. She learned to skin the rabbit, her face pale but her hand steady. She learned to find the dry wood, the kind that smoked less. She became a creature of the wilderness, just as he was. And as they worked, as they fought for every day of life, the bond between them deepened. It was forged not in the soft words of the cabin, but in the shared hardship of the wild. It was in the look he gave her when she brought back 2 rabbits from her snare line. It was in the way she would check his bandage, her touch now practiced and sure. They were a team. They were two parts of a whole, surviving where one alone would have failed. One night, they finally risked a fire, a small one, hidden deep in a rocky cleft. They were roasting the grouse. The smell was heavenly. "You are good at this," Wes said quietly. He was watching her.
"I had a good teacher," she replied, not looking up from the fire.
"No, you had it in you. You just needed to be shown."
He loved her. The thought hit him with the force of a physical blow. It was not the gentle comfort he had felt in the cabin. This was a fierce, sharp thing. It was respect. It was admiration. It was a desperate need to keep her safe. He did not say it. He did not know how. So he just watched her turn the spit, the firelight catching the auburn in her dark hair. The high country was unpredictable. The thaw had been false. A new storm, a late spring blizzard, rolled in from the north, catching them on an exposed ridge. The wind was a physical wall, the snow a blinding, horizontal assault.
"We have to find shelter," Wes yelled over the shriek of the wind.
His shoulder, which had been healing, was a knot of pure agony. The cold had sunk into the bone. He had been favoring it. And, in a moment of exhaustion, his horse slipped on a patch of ice. He went down, hard on his wounded side. He cried out, a sharp, choked sound. Miriam was off her mule in a second, fighting her way through the whiteout to his side. "Wes!" He was on his knees, trying to stand, his face ashen. His sling was torn, and the front of his shirt it was wet, not with snow. The wound had reopened.
"It is all right,"
he gasped, but his voice was weak. She got him back on his horse. She had to lead both animals, half blind, into the swirling chaos. She did not know where she was going. She just knew they had to get out of the wind. She found it by sheer luck. A shallow cave, more of an overhang, in a wall of rock. It was not much, but it was out of the wind. She got him off the horse and dragged him inside. He collapsed onto the blankets, his body already shaking. The storm raged for 2 days. They were trapped. On the second night, the fever came. It was not the low-grade fever from before. This was a monster. It was the infection the doctor had feared. Wes's body was on fire, but he was shaking with a chill that seemed to come from his bone. He was delirious. "Eliza," he mumbled, his eyes wide and unseeing, his good hand reaching out. "Eliza, the smoke, I cannot see the smoke, Thomas. Where is Thomas?" "I am here, Wes," Miriam sobbed, grabbing his hand. "It is Miriam. It is all right."
"No,"
he moaned, his head thrashing. I failed them. All of them. Left them. The Waltons I should be dead." He was burning up. His wound, when she checked it, was swollen, the skin purple and hot to the touch, and it smelled of sickness. He was dying. The doctor was miles away. The storm was a wall of white. There was no one but her. Miriam's panic turned, in a heartbeat, to a cold, hard rage. She would not let him. She had not survived Landon Kale. She had not survived the wilderness. To watch this man die. She thought of Dove, the old native woman. Before they had fled Ten Sleep, Miriam had gone to her, to thank her. Dove had looked at Wes's wound, and then at Miriam. She had pressed a small, leather pouch into her hand. For the fever, Dove had said, "If it comes, boil it. Make him drink. It is bitter, but it is strong." Miriam tore through their supplies. She found the pouch. Inside was a mix of dried leaves, roots, and pale bark. She crawled out into the storm, shielding her body from the wind, and scraped together a small pile of twigs. She used half their matches to get a tiny, sputtering fire lit in the mouth of the cave. She melted snow in their tin cup, and she boiled the herbs. The smell was pungent, bitter. She carried the steaming cup back to him. "Wes, you have to drink." He turned his head away, moaning. "No, leave me." "No!" she shouted, her voice echoing in the small space.
She grabbed his jaw with one hand, forcing his mouth open. She poured the hot, bitter liquid in. He choked. He gagged, but he swallowed. She did this for 3 nights. She did not sleep. She sat, holding him, her own body aching with cold and exhaustion. She melted snow for water. She boiled the herbs. She bathed his face. She spoke to him. "You will not leave me. Wes Coltrane, do you hear me? You are not a failure. You are a good man. You stayed alive. You said it yourself. Courage. Now show it. You fight. You fight this. Do not you dare leave me alone out here." On the 3rd night, the fever was at its height. He was limp, his breathing shallow. She thought she was losing him. She lay down beside him, pulling his head onto her lap, wrapping her own body around him, trying to give him her warmth. "I love you," she whispered, tears streaming down her cold, chapped face. "I love you. Please, do not go." His eyes flickered open. They were not wild. They were clear. He was looking at her. He lifted his good hand, his fingers weak, and touched her face. He traced the path of a tear. "Miriam," he breathed. The word was a bare thread of sound. "I am here," she wept, pressing her cheek into his palm. "I never thought," he whispered, his voice catching. "After Eliza, I was dead, just walking. I never believed I would live long enough to love again." He closed his eyes, his breath hitching. "You," he whispered, "you are my salvation." His hand fell from her face. His breathing, for the first time in days, evened out. He was not moaning. He was sleeping. The fever had broken. When the storm cleared, he was weak as a newborn, but he was alive. Miriam had saved him. They stayed in the cave for a week, until he could stand. They were almost out of food. "We have to move," he said, his voice still a rasp. "We need real shelter." They traveled south, moving slowly, a half day at a time. Wes was in the saddle, but Miriam walked beside him, holding him steady. And then they found it. It was tucked into a high meadow, hidden by a stand of aspen, an old trapper's cabin. It was small, even smaller than Wes's, and it was rough. The roof was half collapsed, the door hanging on one hinge. But it had 4 walls and a stone chimney. "Home," Miriam said, the word coming out on a sigh. They worked, or rather, Miriam worked, and Wes sat, his back against a log, giving instructions. He was a carpenter, a builder. He showed her how to mix mud and grass to chink the logs. He talked her through repairing the roof, laying new pine boughs and sod. It was hard, back-breaking labor, but it was good work. It was building, not running. In the quiet of that meadow, they healed. Wes's wound finally began to close, the infection gone, the strength returned to his body. In Miriam, she found a peace she had never known. She found herself, one afternoon, watching Wes as he sat in the sun, carefully, slowly, carving another piece of wood. He was making a small spoon for her, to replace the one they had lost. He looked up, and his eyes were clear. The ghosts were gone. He smiled at her, the real, rusty smile that crinkled his eyes and softened his scar. And Miriam laughed. It was not the small, bird-like sound from his cabin. It was a real laugh, full and clear and bright. It echoed in the high, clean air. The sound shocked them both into silence. They just stared at each other. And then he smiled again. A month later, a visitor came, a trapper, passing through, had seen their smoke. He was a friend of Elias Thorne's. He had been given a description and a letter. "From the widow," the trapper said, handing a worn envelope to Miriam. "Elias said you would want this." Miriam's hands shook as she broke the seal. Wes stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder. She read the letter aloud, her voice trembling. Sarah Beckett's brother, the one in St. Louis, had taken her letters to the federal marshals. Spurred by her testimony, they had opened an investigation into Landon Cale's finances. His entire empire, as Wes had suspected, was a fraud. Land grabs, fake cattle sales, swindling. He had been arrested. He was in a federal prison, awaiting trial. His influence in Wyoming is gone, Sarah wrote. The judge has been removed. The warrants, they are just paper. They are void. It is over. Miriam, you are free. Miriam read the last line, and the letter slipped from her fingers. Free. She stood there, the paper at her feet, the wind in the high pines the only sound. Wes turned her to face him. He looked at her, at this woman who had saved his life, who had built a home with her bare hands. It is over, he said quietly. You are free. We can go back. We can go anywhere. California, Oregon. What do you want, Miriam? What do you want to do? She looked around. She looked at the small, rough cabin they had built. She looked at the mountains, their peaks touching the sky. She looked at the quiet meadow, green and gold in the afternoon sun. It was not a place of fear. It was a place of peace. She looked up at his face, at the scar she had come to love, at the eyes that no longer held any ghosts. She put her hand on his chest, over his heart. I want to wake up beside you, she said, her voice soft, but perfectly sure. And not be afraid. Wes closed his eyes, a long, slow breath escaping him. He pulled her close, his good arm and his wounded one wrapping around her, holding her tight. He buried his face in her hair. Then we will build that life, he said. The spring that came to the high meadow was a slow, quiet miracle. It was not a sudden flood, but a gradual loosening. The snows, which had been their prison and their protection, drew back inch by inch, like a curtain being pulled away from the world. The ice on the small pond cracked and groaned, freeing the water beneath. Green, tentative and fierce, pushed up through the brown, matted grass. The aspens, which had been bare. Skeletal fingers, blurred with a soft, pale new leaf. The air, once sharp enough to cut, became soft. It carried the scent of pine pitch, damp earth, and promise. For a time it was a paradise. Wes and Miriam lived by the rhythms of this new, gentle world. He was healed. The wound in his shoulder had closed over, leaving a puckered, angry-looking scar. Another mark to add to his collection. But his strength was back. He moved with his old, quiet grace. He hunted, and they ate well. He repaired the cabin, making it solid, making it tight. Miriam, in turn, made it a home. She had found wild onions and a patch of hardy berries. She tended a small fire, and the smell of roasting meat or a simmering broth was always in the air. She even found a way, with Wes's help, to build a small, rough table and 2 stools. They were alone, but they were not lonely. They worked together, ate together, and at night they slept together, wrapped in each other's arms. The small, rough cot was their entire world. He would carve, in the long evenings, and she would mend their clothes, her head resting on his good shoulder. He would play his harmonica, no longer the sad, lonely tunes, but something with a bit of life, a bit of a dance to it. But the world outside, the one they had fled, was still there. It sat on the horizon, a smudge of smoke from the town they could just barely see on the clearest of days. The trapper who had brought the letter had also brought other things. News, gossip. They talk about you, down in Ten Sleep, he had said, spitting tobacco into the fire. Some call Coltrane a hero. Most just call him an outlaw. And the woman, well, tongues wag. Landon Cale was in a federal prison. Yes, he was gone. The charges were void. They were, on paper, free. But Miriam knew the difference between being free on paper and being free in your soul. She began to watch that smudge of smoke on the horizon. West noticed. He saw her. in the quiet moments, standing at the edge of the meadow, looking east. "It is a good life here," he said one evening. They were watching the sunset, the sky a blaze of orange and purple.
"It is," she said, her voice soft. "It is safe."
"Safe is good," he said. He had learned to value safe above all else. "Is it?" she asked. She turned to him. Her face was stronger now, browned by the sun, her eyes clear.
"Or is it just hiding? Cale is gone, Wes, but we are still living like he is hunting us. We are living like we are guilty."
Wes went still. He looked at the vast, empty beauty around them.
This was his sanctuary.
He had brought her here to protect her. "We are not guilty."
"Then why are we hiding?"
she pressed, her voice gentle but insistent.
"You told me I deserve more.
I believed you. But this is not more. This is a beautiful cage. I want to walk in the sun. Wes, I want to walk down a street and hold my head up. I want to have a name that is not whispered." He looked away, his jaw tight. He looked toward the town. To him, it was a place of noise and judgment and pain. It was the place he had been shot. It was the place they had called her a whore. "There is nothing for us down there," he said, his voice rough. "Just people, and their talk."
"There is Elias," she countered. "And Sarah. There are good people. The ones who stood with us, and the ones who were silent, they are not bad men.
They were just afraid, just like I was. Maybe they need to see what it looks like not to be afraid." "It is a risk," he said, "a fool's risk. We have peace here." "This is not peace."
"Wes," she said,
and she took his scarred hand. "This is surviving. I want to live. With you. I do not want to be the hermit's woman, hidden on the mountain. I want to be Miriam Coltrane, in the town, in the light, if that is what you want. Too." The name, Miriam Coltrane, hung in the air between them. It was a thing he had not dared to think about. A wife, a new life. He looked at her, at this woman who had fought a blizzard, and a brute, and a raging fever to save him. He had thought he was protecting her, but he saw, now, that his own fear, his own old wounds, were the last thing holding her captive. She was right. She deserved more than a life in the shadows. They both did. He let out a long, slow breath, the breath of a man who is letting go of the past.
"When do we leave?"
They packed little. They had little to pack. The supplies Elias had given them, the rifles, the bedrolls. Miriam carefully wrapped the small wooden bird and tucked it deep in her saddlebag. Wes left his carving tools on the rough table, a silent offering to the small cabin that had been their sanctuary. They rode down from the high meadow, not as fugitives, but as settlers. The journey was slow. It was not a flight. It was a return. When they reached the edge of Ten Sleep, Wes reined in his horse. The town looked the same. Muddy street, false-fronted buildings, a few wagons hitched to the rails. He felt the old tension in his shoulders, his hand moving near his gun. Miriam reached out and put her hand on his arm.
"Together," she said.
He nodded. Together. They rode down the center of the street. It was as if a silent bell had been rung. Men stopped, their conversations dying. A woman, shaking out a rug, froze. Faces appeared in the windows of the saloon and the general store. The whispers started, a low, sibilant sound, like dry leaves skittering down the boardwalk. "It is him, Coltrane."
"Look, he brought her back."
Shameless, the both of them, riding in like they owned the place. Wes's face was a mask of stone. He stared straight ahead, his eyes fixed between his horse's ears. He felt every stare like a physical weight. Miriam, though, did as she had promised. She held her head high. She looked at the faces. She did not flinch from their judgment. She met their eyes, one by one. Then, a new sound. The ring of a hammer on an anvil. It stopped. The door of the smithy burst open. Elias Thorne stood there, his huge, soot-covered frame filling the doorway. He had a hammer in his hand. He looked at Wes. He looked at Miriam. He did not smile. He was not a smiling man. But he wiped his hand on his leather apron, and he nodded. Once. A deep, slow nod of profound respect. Wes nodded back. One man, that was one. Then, from the general store, Sarah Beckett came rushing out. She did not pause. She did not care who was watching. She ran right to Miriam's mule, her hands outstretched. "Miriam, child, you are back! You are safe!" She grabbed Miriam's hands, pulling her down for an embrace, tears in her eyes. "We heard Elias told me you were in the high country. I have been praying, every day." Miriam hugged her, a fierce, tight hug. "We are back, Sarah. We are back to stay." The town watched, the blacksmith and the widow, the two most respected and the most stubborn. Citizens in town, they had chosen a side. The whispers did not stop, not all at once, but they faltered. The judgment in the eyes of the townsfolk turned to curiosity. Wes and Miriam did not go to the hotel. They rode straight through the town, to the other side. They rode to the small, isolated cabin at the edge of the plains. His cabin. It was just as he had left it. Empty, cold. The door was still barred from the inside, a trick he knew how to undo. Miriam dismounted. She stood on the porch where she had collapsed, half dead, in a wedding dress. It seemed a lifetime ago. Wes unbarred the door. He pushed it open. The air inside was stale, smelling of dust and old ashes. The ghosts were there, waiting in the shadows. Eliza, Thomas, the man Wes had been. He hesitated in the doorway. He could not go in. Miriam walked past him. She went to the window and pushed open the heavy wooden shutters. Sunlight, thick with dancing dust motes, streamed in. It hit the cold hearth. It lit the empty chair. "It needs a good sweep," she said, her voice practical, cheerful. She looked at him, her hand outstretched. "And we will need more wood for the fire. It will be cold tonight." He looked at her, standing in the sunlight, in his old home, and the ghosts, they did not vanish. They simply made room. He took her hand. He stepped inside. Life, for them, began again. It was a life built not on grand gestures, but on small, daily acts of courage. Miriam found her purpose. She had money, the money she had taken from her father's house, which she had never spent. She used it not to buy a new dress, but to rent a small, empty room behind the general store. She painted a sign, her letters careful and clear. 10 sleep school for girls. Reading, writing, arithmetic, all are welcome. On the first day, she had 3 students, the daughters of a homesteader who was too poor to care, and the shy, quiet daughter of the saloon keeper. The town watched. They whispered, "Teaching girls, what is the use of that?" Miriam did not just teach them their letters. She sat with them, and she read to them. She read stories of strong women, of queens, of pioneers. She taught them sums. Yes, but she also taught them that their voice mattered. "You are not property," she told them, her 3 small students sitting around her. "You are not a debt to be paid. You are a person. You have a right to say no. You have a right to be safe. You have a right to be heard." Wes, passing by one afternoon, heard her voice, strong and clear, and he stopped. He leaned against the wall, listening, and he knew. She was not just teaching them. She was healing herself. She was saving all the Miriams who had not been saved. His own healing was quieter. He did not want to be sheriff. He did not want a gun on his hip. He wanted to build. He took work. His first job was for Elias. "My roof leaks," the blacksmith grunted. "You know wood. Fix it." Wes fixed it. He worked for 2 days, his hammer ringing in the clear air. He was a good carpenter, his hands sure, his lines true. When he was done, Elias handed him his pay. "Good work, Coltrane." Good work. Wes agreed. Word got around. Sarah Beckett needed a fence mended. The general store needed a new porch step. The man who ran the livery, who had been one of the loudest to whisper against him, sheepishly asked if Wes could help him rehang a heavy barn door. Wes just nodded. He showed up. He did the work. He was no longer Coltrane the outlaw. He was Wes, the man who fixes things. He smiled more. He talked. Not a lot, but he would nod a greeting to the men on the street. They would nod back. He slept deeper. The nightmares, the ones of smoke and fire, of his own failure. They had not gone away entirely, but they were quieter now. They had lost their power. In his old cabin, he was building new furniture, a proper bed, wide and strong, a real table, a new chair, to sit beside his old one, by the fire. One night, a chill had come back to the air. Autumn was setting in. A fire was roaring in the hearth, the same hearth where she had first lain, cold and terrified. The room was warm. It smelled of coffee and the stew she had simmering. Wes was sitting in his chair, cleaning his rifle, a habit of the past, but a practical one. Miriam came and sat on the bearskin rug at his feet, leaning her back against his knees, just as she had in the early days. He stopped his work, his hand coming to rest in her hair. They sat in silence for a long time. The comfortable, full silence of two people who have nothing left to prove. Miriam tilted her head back, looking up at him. His face was shadowed, the scar softened by the firelight. A small, playful smile touched her lips. "Wes?" she asked, her voice a soft murmur. Can I stay the night?" He stopped, his hand stilling in her hair. She waited a beat. "Forever?" He looked down at her. He saw the woman he had found, and the woman she had become. He saw his own salvation. He did not answer with words. He set the rifle aside. He put his hands under her arms and pulled her up, settling her sideways onto his lap. It was a small space, but they fit. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close, his face burying in her hair. She could feel his heart, beating slow and steady, against her back. He did not kiss her with passion. He just held her. Then he leaned back, and he kissed her forehead. It was a promise. It was a vow. It was an answer. It was yes. The next evening, they sat on the bench Wes had built, just outside their cabin door. The sun was going down. It was a Wyoming sunset, a thing of impossible, heartbreaking beauty. The sky was a flood of deep, bleeding red and brilliant orange, and a soft, pale violet. The plains, which had once been a white, terrifying expanse, were now a sea of golden grass, rolling away to the dark line of the mountains. The air was cool, crisp. It carried the scent of pine and the first hint of winter. Wes sat on her left, his wounded shoulder healed, his arm resting on the back of the bench. Miriam sat beside him, tucked into his side. His scarred, calloused hand found hers. Her small, strong hand slipped into his, their fingers entwined. They just sat. They watched the last sliver of the sun disappear. They watched the first stars prick the velvet, purple sky. No words were spoken. There was nothing left to say. They were home. Thank you so much for listening to our story around the campfire. We would love for you to comment with where you are listening from, so we can all connect with one another. Please feel free to subscribe to the Wild West Campfire channel and share your thoughts on Wes and Miriam's journey.